Real Estate Board says housing supply remains an issue in the region. That as the number of homes changing hands rose 6% in October, but the number of homes for sale was virtually flat year over year. It seems that condos, semi-detached homes are showing the largest price increases. The board says the city needs more medium-density housing choices. So let's put that view to the test. Joining us now is Murtaza Haider, Associate Professor with Ryerson's Ted Rogers School of Management. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
So this is what we're starting to hear more and more from the real estate industry. They've long said that supply was the issue, but now they seem to be focusing on this sort of mixed middle, what some people have called it, and that's what's missing in the city. What are you seeing when you take a look at a city like Toronto? What is missing?
The missing part is the construction of new housing of all types. That's what is missing. When the resales market talks about missing, they were mostly concerned about the listings, and they're saying that there are not enough listings, and hence that is showing some constraints on the supply of existing homes. But the real concern for Toronto, for the city of this magnitude, is the lack of construction of new housing that was responsible to a large extent for rapid price increases that we saw all the way up to the April of 2017. But at this stage, what one sees is a rapid increase, or at least a sustained growth in housing prices for condominiums. And mind you, about a couple of years ago, many people were saying we have overbuilt and there will be a catastrophic decline in sales of condominiums and also for prices, and that hasn't really materialized, and it's very unlikely to materialize in a city like Toronto that is still growing demographically, and it's the entry point to housing is condominiums. And when the low-rise or single-family detached or semi-detached housing becomes very, very expensive, then consumers make a choice and say, should I be interested in buying something much cheaper? And that's the condominiums, and that's the reason this substitute effect for condominiums is working out really well. And because people who cannot afford low-rises moving into high-rises, they're keeping the housing prices high, or at least at a very healthy rate of increase.
That's the dynamic you're seeing now, because I think about when Toronto ran up to that fever pitch into the spring of 2017, it was about the single-family home. Everyone wanted one of those, and now, as we said, if there's any heat at all, it's still single-digit, but that's where it is. It's in condos, it's in semis. Is it a matter of all the regulation that came into play that finally forced a whole cohort of people saying, I have to get into a condo now, I can't afford this, with all the stress tests?
Well, with the stress test, you have to qualify for 200 basis points more than the contracted rate for mortgage. So obviously, there's a bigger hurdle to cross as of January 2018. But you have to realize, in the past few years, of all the homes that the city of Toronto, not the greater Toronto area, but the city of Toronto, they built 85% of whatever got built was high-rises, right? So low-rise housing, such as semi-detached and single-family detached housing, they constituted fewer than 15% of the new housing that was built here. Obviously, there's a demand for low-rise housing, but if it doesn't get built, you will see a rapid increase in the price of low-rise housing.
Now, when it comes to actually finding the space, though, to build the low-rise, I think of how this city has been growing and where they're sticking the condos. They're putting condos in places I never thought you could live, right up against the highway, against the Gardner. This little sliver of land that used to be a parking lot when I was a punk and I'd come down to go to a Jays game, that's a condo now. It's harder, I guess. Is it harder, at least in the city proper, to find that land to build either a semi or a detached home, that kind of stuff that the market's looking for?
Yes, absolutely. See, the parking lots are the endangered species in Toronto. If there's a parking lot somewhere, there's a condo waiting to happen there. But that's one reality. But the other reality is we have to capitalize on the public land that is available that still could be developed for moderate density, if not single-family detached, at least townhomes. There's a desire for ground-level living among the city dwellers, and we have to provide for it. I think there's land, there's a lot of public land that could be developed, not necessarily at high-rise density of 40, 50-story buildings, but you can build something like townhouses or even 5 to 7-story buildings, and there will be a demand for it.
How important is it that that building be done with a mindset of moving people as well? I hear a lot more now that even from developers saying we need to put it around transportation hubs, around subways, around light rapid transit. We need to be able to make sure that once the people are there, they don't have to get in the car, because there's not much space left in the city for moving people around by car. The roads are jammed.
I think there's this general understanding that people would like to build near subway stations, but when you look at people who have moved into, especially the condominiums around Shepherd Subway, Shepherd East was built as of 2001, and you look at their travel behavior, not many are taking the subway. So it doesn't mean that you build near subway stations that people who will move into there would be using subways or higher order transit, because their travel behaviors and destinations may be north of the city rather than everyone going to downtown. So there are lots of myths around, but the traffic studies tell us that the diversity in travel behavior is much more, and therefore we should not be really worried about building very near to public transit, because if you do, what we see with data is that not everybody or majority actually use public transit.
It's a fascinating stat. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
That was Murtaza Haider, professor with the Ted Rogers School of Management at Ryerson University.